So it's important that in your role now as eyewitness today, you say, this is part of the reason it was mellow. She didn't try to fight what was happening. So
No,
I'm sorry, that's really important for me.
Do you need to take a break?
Not yet, but I think we should ask a question about when would you like to hear a couple of questions from the students? I was
Anytime.
hoping to get
Anytime.
through, maybe we take a few questions and
Sure,
then
sure, sure.
take a break for 5 minutes and then
Fine.
just
Great.
maybe, I don't want to disrupt too much because you don't have that much time. But so the members of the class have been reading from the movie. I wonder if anybody would like to jump in with a question of any of the kinds of issues that might have provoked you. Okay, Tanya and Sophia?
Go ahead.
Okay. I have a question for.
Oh, I'm sorry. Would you like to actually introduce yourself and say something about your concentration?
Oh, okay.
We're going to ask everybody who speaks to do that, if you will.
Hi, I'm Anna Sophia. I'm a senior, and my concentration is creating a reflective society through performance. So, like film, television, and theater. So I watched the film and I read sections of the book, and I think what most struck me, I love the way the film was edited and how we could see the full performances. It was very moving, and I was just thinking with the proliferation of like electronic music today, I saw the musicians, they had such relationships with their instrument, and I just kind of wanted to know how you feel that music has changed now, and if there's sort of this lack of, if you see a lack on stage. Yes. If you think we've lost some of the magic that happens between collaborating with other artists on stage.
Well, let me say this about music and about life. It's constantly changing. So you have to find your own heroes, okay, amongst yourselves. Whether they're EDM artists, alternative rock artists, whatever you want to find. You have to find your own people to rely on. We found what we needed to find and what we needed to do at the time. So for me and for some other people, it felt like we had a new beginning, you know, and then all of a sudden things changed. I started later on. I was blessed enough to be in the best-selling jazz fusion band of all time, Spyro Gyra. I'm one of the original members of that, and that's a real jazz fusion band. So we went from rock, and like I mentioned before, there was real separation in music back then. You were a black artist, you were a white artist, you were a Latino artist, but there was never this. You were a rock artist, you were a blues artist, you were a jazz artist, but there was never this. So that's what Jimmy wanted to do. That's what we wanted to do. Then when Jimmy passed away, I lived in Woodstock since 1968. My sister moved up there. When Paul Butterfield moved up there, her husband was the musical director for Paul Butterfield, Keith Johnson, and Keith was also the musical director later on for Van Morrison. So I used to go up there and stay in my sister's house all the time, you know, and listen to what was going on in the story. She's a little older than me until I said that. And, you know, the music was turning. Let me get to your question right now. The music was turning. Everything was changing. And I thought, this is what we're going to, this is the music that's going to happen forever. And then all of a sudden there was a shift again. So to answer your question, then when I was in Spyro Gyra and we were doing great and I had Grammy nominations, and I'm in Hall of Fame and doing all this stuff, and yeah, we're on top of the world. The music changed again, and we became immortal. And I remember the first time we were on an elevator, and our songs came on the elevator through Muzak. Muzak was the elevator music back then. And we were like, man, the guys in the band go, look, damn, man, with Muzak. Now I said, we are done. That's it. Now we are mainstream. We are done. We are no longer, and that's basically what happened. Now you hear that Pablo music, which they call jazz or smooth jazz or whatever. It's just another form of music, blah, okay? Because there's no creativity. It's programming from radio stations to say, this is what you have to play. That's how bad it's gotten today. So when I see young people taking computers and taking software and moving it around and taking plugins, because that's what you have now. The digital world is amazing. EDM, it's great stuff. Now, there's certain things about EDM, just like in our generation. I want to take the 800-pound gorilla out of it, okay? When it comes to drugs, right? Now, here's what's happening with drugs. We thought our minds were going to expand. We told, if we did these mind-expanding drugs, we would be released from all the problems and all the baggage we brought with us in the past, okay? So when you look at what we were doing then, you have a different world now. Your world is really based on this new paradigm shift, and it's up to you now. This is what we did. And as far as I'm concerned, the war is on again. Our war is on again. What we did back then, maybe we didn't complete the job, but no philosophy and no type of government is actually perfect, right? So with EDM music, when somebody says to me, those guys are not even a musician, I said, they're creative. EDM and new artists are creative. You have to find your own creativity. If you're going to pick up a guitar, you're going to sit in your room for 14 hours a day and learn how to play that guitar until your fingers bleed, because that's your dedication. You want calluses there, and you want to go out and just play flawlessly, right? And that's what we did back then. You stayed home and shed it, as we called it. But today, you have the internet. You have so much going on and so much wonderful information before you. That's why you have to disseminate what's for you, and to kind of section that off as to what you believe in. When you're asking me what the evolution of music has been, that's what I'm trying to explain right now. Now it's up to you guys to take it to the next level. And I'll be on that rival seat, but I'm waiting for you guys to take us to the next level.
How about Sonia?
Hi, I'm Sonia. I'm a senior also, and my concentration is mixed media storytelling with a focus in cross-culturalism and film. And I was wondering, you've lived with Woodstock your entire lives from when it was born. How do you want Woodstock to live on in sort of an active nostalgia generations later when the people that were there aren't there to tell the stories? What sort of values and lessons and kind of vibes do you want
Can
to
I
live
go
on?
first and short?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Well, this is really important to me, and I'll make it short because it's really my goals. No, well, for 40 years, I've heard people tell me what happened at Woodstock. And I go, that's incredible. Were you there? And usually it's no. Although I've met lots of people in everyday life, and I know there's a million different Woodstock stories from the people who were there. But as time has passed, and I've traveled all over the world, Mary Alice and I have shot rock and roll stories all over the world, so have Karen and I. And Mary Alice and I, who's in the front row, have gone to a lot of communist countries. And I've shot in places where kids have never had music concerts. The first Rolling Stones concert, the first concert ever in Czechoslovakia after the fall of communism. And if the kids could speak English, they'd say, we want our Woodstock. So what Woodstock became, and this is the way I describe it, is an idea. And the idea is about peace and love and community, and what can happen in a positive way when people come together, where there's an aligned purpose. And I don't have some airy-fairy idea about what happened, because there were people, the only guy who died was sleeping under a tractor off the property. But, there were people that OD'd and all that. But the idea of getting together as a community that's for something, for peace and love, is one of the residual parts of Woodstock. And I always say, it's like a window open to show us the possibility of what all of us counterculture, weirdo, hippie, peace, love freaks wanted. And in that weekend, we saw that it was possible, that people got along. Now, maybe it's airy-fairy, and maybe I'm being Pollyanna-ish, but that's my experience of it. And in talking to kids all around the world who have a deep yearning for this idea of our Woodstock, that's what Woodstock was about. So I hope that wasn't too gushy, but that's really what I think.
I mean, I think, Woodstock was about hope. At a pretty dark time in our history, which is sort of feels like we're living through it again, frankly. It gave, this sort of hope that people could exist together in a much more compassionate way. That, it wasn't inevitable that war has to follow us down through the ages. And just that side of possibility was kind of demonstrated and I think took hold. And I think that's pretty much why it resonates today, still. And so that's a great message. And I'd be delighted, to see carried forward. And we may be carrying it forward next year on our 50th anniversary, a bit. And it was really about a counterculture that was very committed to activism and to making their voices heard, and that's something that should concern all of you. It's your world that you're coming into, and I think complacency is how we wound up where we are now, frankly. And I think it's everybody's responsibility to, sort of do what they can to make it a better world, and to voice, put their voices, and their bodies in the way. So.
Does it resonate with you as young people?
So much. I mean, especially in the world where the world has come to now, this sense of hope and community and storytelling and how that connects people that's all we have.
Yeah.
Let's have a few more student questions. Why don't you pass them like either forward or back, whichever you prefer.
Okay, so there's a scene in the movie where one of the Kundalini yoga instructor, he's talking about the similarities between yoga and smoking DMT. And it just sort of made me wonder that the 60s, I think one of the major movements that characterized that time period was a renewed interest in the East, in Eastern spirituality. And I wonder if there's something about the psychedelic experience that leads people to become interested in that.
Enlightenment.
Yeah.
Pretty much it. I mean, that's kind of what drug culture was striving for, and it's something that resonated with Eastern cultures.
The trajectory, though, specifically, in 1968, the Beatles went to Rishikesh to be with the Maharishi because George Harrison was interested in meditation. They were coming out of the Jack Kerouac and the Beatniks and all that. And that was happening at the same time as people were starting to discover meditation and yoga. Peter Max, an artist, was a friend of Michael's, who was a devotee of Swami Satchidananda, who had an ashram here in LA and was at the beginning of the yoga thing. Peter asked if he could bring Satchidananda, if you'll tell that, because bringing Satchidananda in front of 500,000 people shifted the axis, I think.
Well, it was just, it was kind of a moment of setting the mood, I guess, for the weekend. That there was a spiritual side to what we were doing, and Swami Satchidananda sort of represented that, and it was a pretty magical moment, I think, for everybody who was there. And it also kind of
Here he is,
introduced,
speaking, opening.
and and he and the Integral Yoga Institute kind of really brought yoga into the mainstream, following Woodstock and the following years.
But to answer your drug question, I think a lot of us started out taking drugs, but I would say that you took drugs, and if you had a brain in your head and didn't become a drug addict and all that, you saw that what you were really looking for was enlightenment, as Michael said.
If I may say, yes, history, India, East, just so enchanting over there, completely different than who we are, where they are. People are a little different than the rest of us, have a different way of thinking. Transcendental meditation allows you to focus and find out who you are. Other forms of doing that ancient cultures have practiced, through relaxation, yoga, massage, to shiatsu, all these different things that Western medicine frowned upon. And we got into what was called better living through chemistry. Yes, what was Tao, one of those companies? Better living through chemistry. And basically what that meant, that everything that we were going to do was chemically oriented, that natural foods and natural healing processes were no longer adequate, because now we have these chemicals that can change it. And that's why I wanted to get the 800-pound gorilla out of the room, because I know when I was a kid, I was 16, I went to Carnegie Hall. I went upstairs. There were beautiful apartments above Carnegie Hall. I went up there with some friends, and I always hung out with older guys and girls. I went there, and I was in this room with older people that looked like, they didn't look like hippies like us. They looked like more university people, right? And they gave us acid. And I was in a control room, and we were just hanging out, and they were, how you doing? How's it feeling? Yeah, don't worry, we're here to protect you. We're here to take care of you. Just relax and just let us know what you're thinking. And of course, that's what we would think. We said, wow, this is incredible. Now, I'm ADD, and I'm dyslexic. When I found methamphetamine hydrochloride, I was able to focus. Now that they call it rhythm, right? Back then, that's what, and when I So, the 800, I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
So the 800-pound gorilla is what I'm saying, is that we expected that these enhancing, mind-enhancing drugs are going to take us to another place, a greater place, a place where our minds would be more open to all kinds of ideas, all kinds of culture, like they have done in other areas, right? That's what we thought we were going to do with these chemicals. We were told our minds were going to expand. We were told we were going to use more of our brain. That's what we were told. Okay? So when the jury came in that you stop doing that crap or you're going to die, you know, I stopped in April 15, 1975. I know the exact day that I stopped. That's the exact day I stopped 43 years ago. I've been training, working out. It's one or the other for me, right? So I train and I work. What I'm saying is that journey for me put me in that spiritual zone. When I work out, I don't talk to anyone. I'm not in the health club. I'm in a place where I get in tune with myself, and I'm in the endorphins coming through me. I'm back in that place where I was 20 years old, 21 years old. In here, and I feel in here as well. And then it'll disappear. Recovery gets worse and worse. That's what happened. So I just wanted to get the 800-pound gorilla out of the room. That we weren't here just to get high and just to tune out. That wasn't what we were after. We were wanting to tune in to a deeper place. That's what we were trying. And that's what Michael did by bringing us together. To me, it was about, we lost our soul. The United States lost its soul. And then in the 60s, we were trying to recapture our soul. And Michael said, hope. Of course, that was hope. Empathy for people who are in a different position in prosperity consciousness. You have money? Help other people. That's prosperity consciousness. That's giving back. So with the 800-pound gorilla, I'm done with talking about you.
I'm just going to interrupt. I want to get a few more stupid questions. Do you want to pass the mic back to Andy? Since I hand up before. I just want to say that in our class, we've looked at a lot of issues of, I guess we could call them mind-altering drugs. And we've looked at a lot of cases where there's a kind of ecstasy that comes from wine or Dionysiac dancing that's not brought on by drugs, and also violence that comes of it in one particular case. But we've been studying Bacchus for all semester. So the questions about the relationship of festive behavior to different kinds of enabling festive sort of celebrational things have definitely been a big part of our class, and not a sense that this is alien by any means, but actually really rather similar to some of the things that we've been reading.
Well,
Anthony?
just before you go there, it's interesting you talk about Bacchus because in the early 1900s in Woodstock there were these Maverick festivals which were put on by Harvey White, which were bacchanals basically. I mean there were drugs and there was costumes and there was dancing.
Michael,
and
there's
there
some pictures of the festivals. that we did.
was, there you go. Yeah.
That's Isamu Noguchi, the sculptor, up there on the right.
They were having a very good
It was a
time.
very interesting.
I think they would have liked to read that. I also want to say, just because we're on this drug thing, that Michael, once again, in his wisdom, and I'm not, Michael said, well, we needed a lot of police. And he had to hire off-duty police from the tri-state area, but the condition was to hire them.
First of all, you couldn't come armed, and we had a kind of a book of questions, amongst of which were, what would you do if somebody blew marijuana smoke in your face? And if you said inhale, you were hired.
Good question.
But they had to be able to get along with people, and they had to tolerate.
They were there to help. They weren't there to police.
Right. And just think about what it was like then. They were shooting kids at Kent State. So, even if he didn't have that complete vision when it happened, in the moment, he came up with the right response that helped the situation be one of peace and calm.
Hi, I'm Andy. I'm studying the history of environmentalism. And my question was, what do you all think of the modern music festival, things like Coachella and Lollapalooza, and how they've deviated really far from what Woodstock originally was, or if they relate at all?
They relate. I mean, they're they're about people coming together and bonding over music. I think, and certainly most modern festivals, big festivals, are modeled after Woodstock in terms of, how they're structured and what takes place on site. Woodstock was about all of the arts. We were celebrating painting and sculpting and crafts, and pretty much that's a formula that's followed to this day. The difference is that Woodstock was more of kind of a sociological experiment than just a music festival. And it was about the counterculture, and it was about our lives, and it was about expressing, kind of our dreams of what the world could be. And I think that's missing from most festivals these days. I mean, there's things like Global Citizen, which dedicate themselves strictly to that. But most festivals, I think, it's a lost opportunity. It's a missed opportunity.
I think
an answer to that too. I think when here's what will change. We felt like we weren't going to take sponsorship from Kellogg's. We weren't going to say, because that was death to us. But after a while, certain bands started doing it and became profitable, and then there was no way to support concerts. So there's a guy named Ron Delson. He went to Rheingold Beer with my dear stepfather, Arthur McCanty, the famous boxing referee, was the head of promotion. He said, listen, I got this idea of connecting music with sponsorship. And Arthur said, let me go to my committee and do that. And came back and said, all right, we'll give you the money to do it. And that's how sponsorship started. And it really changed the nature. See, what we were doing, we don't want you to tell us what to do, corporations. You're doing what you're doing, and we want to do something else. But it went like this. And that's why younger people say to me, you guys were, you think you were hot shots back then, but look the way the world is now. Hey, like I said before, we tried the best we could, right? So that's kind of.
So I'm going to suggest that we take 2 or 3 questions in a row.
Right, I'd just like to finish that thought. So, during Woodstock, there were no sponsorships, there were no T-shirts to buy, there were no hats, there were concession stands from people around the city. There was no organized food, there was nothing to buy. It became a marketing opportunity afterwards to do that. So that was one huge shift. I think whether it's Coachella or Burning Man, you draw a straight line from Woodstock to that. The difference is, you go to Coachella, you get to buy that VIP package for $800, and I know this because I've done it, right? Is environment considered at Coachella? I lost my voice, I got sick because of the environment and cigarette smoking and all that. So I think while it's held up as a wonderful community opportunity, I think it's a money-making opportunity.
Well, it's Los Angeles.
Right, but I'm saying where I live, not in Brooklyn. But I think that what was running our motor at the time is very different than the people who run Coachella and Lollapalooza and Burning Man. These are big opportunities to make money. I think Michael would have loved to make good money. Karmically, that is not what happened. He got to be the guy. Woodstock got to be the thing. He did not get rewarded like the guys at Coachella get rewarded. That's just not how it turned out.
I got my reward.
Well, you got your reward. So I just want to say it's different, but there is a direct line. Go ahead.
I'm going to ask a couple things in a row to pass the mic around. So after we pass it to Riel, sorry.
Hi, I'm Audrey. Sorry, I lost my voice as well. So I'm studying American Empire and its relationship to the creative industries. And so I'm focusing on the music industry specifically. And my question is about AEG Presents and Live Nation, like ruling the promoter and the festival industry now, and how they're buying out all the independent promoters. And I was just wondering your opinion on that, and if you feel independent promoters could obtain something much more similar to Woodstock in comparison to like Live Nation and AEG Presents.
Live Nation and AEG own festivals.
I'm going to stop you for a second. Let's let 2 or 3
Okay.
ask questions.
Oh, I see. Okay, got it.
Oh, great.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Maria. I'm studying iconography, which is the study of icons through art history and film theory. My question is basically, you guys came from such a great generation of youth who believed in peace and peace for all, pretty much. And I just want to know if you guys have any words of wisdom or advice for this generation who is dealing with a lot of SHIT in the world right now, and just how we can bring our minds together to kind of create something like what you guys did.
Well, to go in reverse order, look at the kids from Parkland. I mean, that's
Gotta
their
look
answer,
inside.
really. Is stand up.
And you gotta look inside. Our generation, I mean, I'll speak just of myself specifically here. My entire thing, I wanted rock and roll and spiritual life. They were equal, and at this point, spiritual life has, if there was better rock and roll, no, just kidding. But you have to look inside, and that's where, when you know yourself, you can go out and contribute to other people. That's what I think. And in today's environment, you have to look inside and see where that thing is, get your community together, and then you have to do it that way. About promoters.
Yeah. So they bought up a lot of these festivals, but they don't operate them. The individual promoters who develop the festivals pretty much are who operates them. And as I said, it's they're not, AEG or Live Nation would not really have an issue with a festival being about more than just the music, being about community, being about sustainability, being about activism. That's not something that they necessarily will instill in them, but they certainly wouldn't be against it. I don't think, anyway. For me, the more interesting festivals these days are the smaller ones, which are highly curated and really have interesting takes on music and art and society. Burning Man to me is not really a moneymaker. They don't really make much money there, but it's about anarchy and it's about art, and it's an amazing experience. It's like if you haven't been, it's like taking a trip to Pluto for a week. It's phenomenal. But I think that, we're considering a festival for the 50th anniversary, which is in 2013, and it's going to be built around 2019. It was a very good year. It's good, if we do it, it's going to be built around sustainability and activism, and trying to sort of energize the movements that we see creeping up. It's kind of what Bernie started, and when he lost, kind of went away. But there was an energy that he brought to I think young people that was pretty amazing, and one that we would like to help foster.
I'm wondering, I'm going to take a vote. We often take a break, but there's 1 hour left of our last time. You guys want a 5-minute break? Everyone who wants one, put their hand up. Anybody who doesn't, put your hand up. Yes, sir. Okay, so it looks like maybe we won't take a break.
I want to
You all
talk
need a break.
about
No.
one thing that was so amazing about Woodstock. Had I been there, I would really know this as an eyewitness. But that people were in this mess together, and they just started giving and sharing, and that was, how do you make that kind of thing happen?
You can't make that kind of thing happen. You can create, a space and an atmosphere where it's possible for that to happen, but people have to bring that intent with them, and they did. And it wasn't just people who were at the festival. It was people in the towns that surrounded them. It was people who were stuck out on the thruway. There was just this amazing kind of sense in the air that you could drop your defenses, and this was your family and your extended family.
Yeah, which is
And it was pretty amazing and spiritual.
It was.
Rona, could I make one point? Because you touched on it a couple of times. I'm Bob Gruen, a photographer. I was at Woodstock, an old friend of
Sorry,
Rona.
this is Bob
Michael.
Gruen, who's taken the greatest pictures of
Right.
John Lennon ever. John Lennon Frost picture, John Lennon New York City. This is one of the great photographers on the planet.
But I was at Woodstock as a camper. I bought tickets. I actually bought tickets when I saw in the advertisement. I saw the Who were playing. I bought tickets. But there's a point that I make sometimes, because people often talk about Woodstock and what a change it made in society and in culture, And people today tend to look at the 60s as everybody was out demonstrating and everybody went to Woodstock. There were 200 million people in America, so 500,000 people went to Woodstock, which is a lot of people. But 299.5 million people didn't go, and all 299.5 million people who didn't go wanted to kill us or at least cut our hair and beat us up. So it was amazing that those people, which was a very tiny group of people of America, made such a difference, because the fact that we all got along and that everybody had such a good time really impacted society in the sense of what happened afterwards. It wasn't the people at Woodstock who made the change. It was the stories that came out of it, the way it affected everybody else. Because there's a very tiny minority of people in America who were at Woodstock or even at the protests in the in the streets protesting the war.
It was really the film that spread it
The film
around the world. Yeah.
It was when everybody else saw it and got the idea that it was really fun.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make that point.
You know, I did an,
I'm wondering if we should maybe take 2 more questions and I'd like you guys to go back.
Yeah, 'cause there's a couple things I really want Gerardo to say. Right.
I actually would like to sort of prioritize students.
Thank you, Bob.
Hey. Cool. Hi, my name is Eduardo Rios. My concentration is, do you hear me? Good. Yeah, my name is Eduardo. My concentration is the poetry of music criticism, and this is a question for all of you. Because you all approach music from such different angles, just like, you know, as a creator, as a journalist, as a booker, and I'm wondering, when you guys knew that you wanted to dedicate your lives to music, like, was there a specific moment?
I was 10. I knew I wasn't a musician. Girls didn't have careers then. I was just going to where music was. That was it. I had my transistor radio like everyone I've ever interviewed. I kept it under the pillow. It connected me to God or whatever and other people, and there was never anything more powerful in my life until I had children.
When we were talking about vibration before, that's what music is all about, with vibration, with electricity, and with energy. And music gets through us, just like we're put together by gravity, right? You know, together we're running. Now, in raw water, it will go away, perhaps. Now, we're held together that way, right? Music is held together that way. The vibrational energy that we all feel when we're doing music. If you see someone who's less advantaged, and these people are going like this all the time, well, they're stimulating the core of their spine, which gives them endorphins into their body. So, and someone goes, wow, what's with that person? Well, that person is whether they have some kind of challenge of some kind. They're creating endorphins, and they're creating the right kind of energy. And that's what they're doing back, creating the energy, the electricity, and the vibration that would pool out, like Bob said, that would pool out to the entire world. And the movie was the biggest selling concert movie of all time. And that was, you know, like a 4-hour movie. When we went, the first time I saw the movie, I said, God, it's a long movie.
A long
And
event.
then edited. And to answer your question, look, well, here's what happened with, I believe what happened with me. I've been promoting concerts since 1981. I had an event business. I did New York Stock Exchange, Mercantile Exchange, all these big corporations, lots of money. If you didn't do it right, you were kicked out. I did their events. And why did I do their events? Because that's where the money was. And when I realized that art was no longer the vehicle to do my art, I realized that money was the only vehicle to do my art, and I have to take care of my own art, not whether it rely on a manager or an agent or anything like that. So when you have a culture that relies on other influences to influence your music, you're really taking that vibrational energy way down. And that's the difference between us. We were like glowing. We were buzzing
I'm
that.
going to ask you guys just to name an age. You started already. You
10.
said 10. How about you?
So when I was 10 or 11, I started playing the drums in a band. And by the time I was 14, I realized I was never going to make it as a musician.
Right. We were smart. We knew we were.
But
About 5 or 6.
I was a dancer. My sister, if you grow up in a Latin household, you go to a party, you put on music, and you dance. Everyone danced. And also, my father had a cousin, Uncle Rafael, and he had an 11-piece Latin band. And he would come in the night, and he would bring his entire band after they dedicated. Set up in the living room. In in the apartment. I don't know how we ever got away with it. But they would start playing music, all this stuff. It was mumble, it wasn't salsa. And the cha-cha and all that. And that's how I grew up dancing. My sister and I had danced that since we were 6, 7. So that's how I started. I started out as a dancer, and then we went to visit our family in California, and we went to Tijuana. Both my parents moved out in their first pair of bungalows. We had this big sedan, that the back was like a huge area when you were a little kid, right? I was playing just my father was there. Put my bongos back in the back, and that's why I was starting. I said, "This is for me. This is for me." And how it affected me, because I'm dyslexic and had other issues. I thought when I would dance, all life was mine.
Right.
Everything became like, wow, I can focus on this for the rest of my life, and people will like me because we all want to be liked, right? Who doesn't want to be liked?
So let me just have a couple more people. Shannon, Lucas, Jalen, any of you guys have a question you want to put out? All right. I want the students from my class.
These are great questions,
Yeah.
really.
So come on, just talk and don't be shy.
Hi, I'm Shannon. I'm studying human behavior and analytical decision making. So my question is, you mentioned the 2019 festival. So did that idea come out of just kind of purely because it was the 50th anniversary and you thought that it should be recognized again? Or was it more that with the political climate that's throughout our country right now, you saw this as like something that should be necessary for next year? Or
I don't know that it's necessary, but it certainly will be timely. And that's kind of what's inspiring our thinking of doing that. Yeah.
If you walk down the street in New York or anywhere else with Michael carries Woodstock with him every day of his life. I've walked down the streets with him in New York. People go, "You're the guy." So Woodstock has been part of his life every day. It's the 50th, the 40th, the 30th, the 25th. His life, there's no, Woodstock is never not there. That's fair to say.
Yeah,
right?
it's true.
I'm going to pick one more student, and then we'll see what you guys want to do.
Not to speak for you. It's true.
Hi, I'm Georgie. I'm a junior here in Gallatin, and my concentration is in cultural criticism and journalism. And I was most surprised in the film by how peaceful everything remained. And I was wondering, besides the enormous number of people you weren't expecting, what was the most pleasant surprise for you at the end of the festival?
At the end?
Or
It was over.
throughout?
I mean, I think it's what everybody was feeling. It was just this sense of this was a family, and you could trust them, and you could trust yourself with them, and there were things to get through. We had terrible weather. We had almost hurricane force winds on the Sunday.
No toilets.
There were toilets, but they weren't exactly appealing.
No toilets. No toilets.
So, there was this sense that you were with your homies, and that included everybody.
So I had an arc of experience, and I thought of the first day, because my job then, we had a press tent, and that was great until the press tent got turned into the second LSD freakout ward. So we lost that. So then I said, well, what can I do? So I went to the operations thing after the rain, and I arranged food drops and blanket drops. And then I would look at people and say, this is just fucking amazing that they're sitting there so mellow. Could I ever do this? And there was this sense that everyone just decided to make it work. There were people out in a lake, and they never got to the show, and they made it work. And then the people up behind the Ferris wheel that somebody put up, they made it work. And there was this community consciousness very much, and the music, and the fabric of the time, that everyone decided this was going to be just infused with peace and love. And I'm really not airy-fairy person, but that's what it was like.
Well, we put it, when we presented it to the public, we presented it as 3 days of peace and music.
Right.
That's what it was going to be. And it was called Woodstock, and Woodstock, was where Dylan lived, and where, which was kind of and it was kind of a music center for America at the time. And so that was the expectation. And our job was to make sure that when you got there, it either met or surpassed your expectation.
But I want to get back, I'm sorry, Michael, that he held this as a continuous vision. So if you're going to kind of create something out here in life, whatever it is, it's taken many years for me to sort of come to this thing and say, Michael held fast to this vision, whatever your vision is. It doesn't have to be about Woodstock, but the integrity of what we're talking about with regard to this particular thing, it being peaceful, it being a community, was something that was in his original vision that was clearly important to him. He wanted to deliver on what his idea was, And I mean, we're good friends, but I just am saying this because it's gotten clearer to me as people try to manifest things. Why did this one work and turn out this way? How come this was different? Because there was a community of like-minded people that included staff and musicians who came together with this vision to create this reality. So that's my philosophical statement.
And you also, go.
No, yes.
Oh, I was going to say, you also had to deal with, I don't know if you know who Abby Hoffman is, who was the founder of a group called the Yippies in the East.
I know who Abby Hoffman is in the class.
An activist in the
Chicago
60s.
Seven.
I think probably most of them do not.
Do not, okay.
You know about the incident
Chicago
the
Seven?
Chicago 7, the incident at the Democratic Convention in
Real political activists, but they started a group called the Yippies, so involved theater with political, but a hardcore political activist. The East Village Coalition was another group with whom you had to negotiate. They probably wanted to be more overtly political. So talk a little bit about that.
There was a lot of kind of attitude even from the underground press and we promoted Woodstock through the underground press and through college press to campuses, and we did it nationally. And there was, this counterculture attitude that it should be made political, and each group should have time on stage to speak about their issues, and our opinion was that the biggest political statement we could make was that it worked, and that's really what our focus was. And so we had a kind of an underground conference, which was run by a guy named Jim Forat, who was an underground kind of newspaper person and speaker and what would you call Jim?
You guys know the reference to the word underground in this context? Okay.
Counterculture, anyway. Right. And so we had a meeting, and people came from all over the country, from press, from college press and underground press, at the Village Gate, right here, on Bleecker Street. And we made our pitch, and it was discussed, and I made sort of presented my ideas and why I thought it was best not to have speeches from the stage, and we settled on a movement city, which was an area where they could all have their information given out, and where Abby Hoffman, as we negotiated with him, would run a printing press that would give survival information to people. And the interesting thing is that by Friday afternoon, Movement City was deserted because this was what they were striving for. And I forget where I was going with that. But
Well, and Abby tried to get on the stage.
so yeah,
About this area here.
so Abby Hoffman, which Abby was kind of a very bright, very personable, and very kind of caustic, anti-establishment radical.
It's one of the Chicago
Yes.
Seven, if you want to Google it later.
Yeah. And Abby came up and started, working with his newspaper, with his daily, survival sheet, and then started working for us at the medical centers, at our medical tents and with medical supplies, and spent, 30 hours straight doing that after he sort of got into the flow of things. And he showed up at the stage about 2 o'clock in the morning or 2:30 in the morning, I think on Sunday, and got a hold of me and was, talking about somebody that was running around with a gun underneath the stage, and we had to go stop this guy. And so on the way from the medical tent to the stage, Abby had sort of imbibed along the way several times. And so he was kind of out there, and I said, the Who's about to go on stage. Let's just go sit down and listen and talk about this afterwards.
See this attitude.
So we went up on stage, and we're sitting there watching The Who, and Abby had been dying to make some sort of a speech about
John Sinclair.
John Sinclair, who was in jail for 15 years
For a joint.
2 joints. 2 joints.
For what?
2 joints.
2 marijuana cigarettes.
Yeah.
I don't think right. John Sinclair was not laughing.
And so Abby was like, just bursting at the seams. I have to say something. I said, well, finally I said, okay, when the Who's set is over, you can say something about John Sinclair, because it was not really political. It was more about our culture, and he was kind of off his head anyway, and I thought maybe he'll forget about it by then. In the middle of the set, Pete turns to his amplifier, to adjust his amplifier, and as he turns back, Abby runs up, grabs his microphone, and starts talking about John Sinclair. So Pete turns and sees this guy at his microphone, takes his guitar and swipes him across the back of the head.
A very Pete Townsend-like thing.
And that hurt. And so Abby went down on the stage and then jumped off the front of the stage and off into the crowd, and then disappeared for the rest of the weekend.
Another Woodstock tale.
Let's talk about Jimmy, you and Jimmy renting the house in
You and Jimmy as
Phoenicia.
roommates with all those girls.
And
Yeah. Now, the reason we hooked up so well, Jimmy and I, because I'm a Puerto Rican kid who grew up in Italian, Irish, German, Jewish neighborhood. There was always a conflict. I was always in it, but I was always, let's go kick the shit out of spits and niggas. No offense, Jerry. Okay. So I always felt that those times were not right for me, and Jimmy lived in Seattle, and 3 black families in all of Seattle, and we talked about how hard it was, to get in there, and we talked about how much we loved America, and I was born, I'm American, I'm not Puerto Rican, I'm an American Latino, that's what I tell people. Because when I go to Puerto Rico, I go, hey, Americano, Daddy! I'm the American there, and here I'm the Puerto Rican. So it's like we were both people without a country, so to speak. I mean, now I have no problem with it. I didn't have any problem with it. But we discussed that one, and we talked about it. And we talked about music, and he introduced me to Red Fox, and all the dirtiest black Chipman Circuit comedians. There was Red Fox, and my mom's name was Pygmy Markham. All these great comedians that never saw the light of day until they gave what's his name a chance to have a TV show. But he would play. He had 2 trunks filled with these records, 33 and 30 records, and he had turntables. We had this big music room. Seemed like a big music room. I went back 20 years later. It was a tiny room. It's so big. Rooms are when you go in the bodies and half of it, and then you go later and go, it wasn't that big. But it was so big to us. And then all the equipment was, and we would practice and all that. Now, Jimmy and I were the first one. I was the first one at the house. We went to the house. He said, we're at this house, and I took the girls. We went up there in the limo, and then I wanted to case out the place to see where I was going to, how we going to do this house with these other guys for 6 months. So I took the limo, and we got up there early, and I said, okay, and I went upstairs, and there was a lower level with the kitchen and a dining room, and then there was another room here, and then a large living room. There was a staircase that went up to the second level. And then when we got to that second level, there was like a foyer area, and then there was one room on this side, and another room on that side. No, sorry. My room was on the right, which was the smallest large room, and I made sure that Jimmy had the large room on the other side of this large bathroom. one cent business. And we would, you know, and we'd party in this little area after everything. I think Ken Rankin, he gave me an acoustic guitar. I'd been bonded to something, had other people sitting around, and we're sitting around and playing in this little area. And then, you know, we'd all play coffees while it was, and then, you know, he'd go off with someone, I'd go off with someone, and then later on, you know, we had beer. Whatever we had beer, and I'd go and I'd knock on his door, come on, Jimmy, you gotta get up. Or he'd come and he'd wake me up, and we'd be in front of the sinks, and we'd be, wow, I'm gonna go have for breakfast and brushing our teeth. And I was like, oh man, I hurt everywhere. You know, really tired or whatever. And Claire Maurice, who was a chef, our chef, and she's writing a book about it. She's a wonderful lady. She would have to smell the food, you know, downstairs. And we would be making up songs, because, you know, back then you hardly heard any, unless it was sweets. And, yeah, so we made up a song about corn checks, boom, 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 and we go down the steps, boom, 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 boom. And we made up these songs. Everything was about tempo, song, or lyrics. And then we go into this room, and we put on a record. All right, blind search. Boom, pull some magic. Boom, put it on the turn. It could have been classical, and we jammed to classical. Then, okay, and we jammed to something else. And we jammed to something else. We jammed to something else. And then we took that and we go, what do you think? Well, we were trying to get a fusion band. And I said, well, that stuff's great. And we started talking. And then we started talking about names for the band. And I said, let's call it Gypsy Southern Rainbows. You know, it was all about that. I mean, my sister was in the band called Martha Velez and the Children of God. Martha Velez, Jerry Moore, and the Children of God. So, you know, we're all about that kind of stuff.
Gerardo, would you talk a little bit about what he's like as a music journalist? There really aren't a lot of people left alive who knew Jimi Hendrix, and most of the time they were stoned if they were with him. And some of the things you talked about at lunch were really remarkable about what his personality was like and the temperament.
Yeah.
So.
And that's kind of, so there we were in this room, just he and I. And
Pictures.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, do it again? The same one? These are actually Dan Garson.
Some are Dan Garson's, who was, well, Karen's bringing them up. So some of the pictures here are.
Oh, these are your.
So
okay.
some of them are mine of the staff before the festival. The art crews had stitched and put up stuff in art. There's Alan Ford, no longer with us. Lots of people no longer with us. But Dan Garson was a 17-year-old in the 11th grade at New Haven, Connecticut High School who rode away for a press pass and took 250 of the most.
The ones that we were just watching, the black and white tour, all this young Dan Garson.
Right. Anything, if it's out of focus, it's mine. That's mine, though. I thought she was the main thing. That's staff. So there's beautiful pictures from Dan Garson, who was 17. There's Henry Diltz's pictures. He was the official photographer and a lifelong friend of ours. And there's some of my bad ones of the staff catching up on the months before. So anyway.
I want to tell you a story about Woodstock, if I may. Okay. I want to tell you about Woodstock. Woodstock, you should have been there. I wrote a music called Woodstock, you should have been there. Not like, you should have been there, but my Lord, you should have been there. This is maybe rhetorical for some of you young people, but the rest of most people I think we have there that have been there, you'll understand. Okay. So where were you mid-August of '69? I don't know if the planets were truly aligned, but it was Jimmy and me with a bevy of babes, and we were circling around in a rainbow haze. Well, we were flying loud. We never heard a sound. We had this big old house on the concert ground. Well, down below in the muddy tent, the first mosh pit that would soon stop that train. People embracing arm in arm, your new best friends for a moment in that song. We were releasing inhibition. We were banging drums. We were primal dancing. We were kicking it from here. This is what it was all about. Well, there were thousands of people. There were twice as many hands. Double that by the claps and all the raised faces from the band. We were there to be with our music guys who made us feel turned on. The songs of Jimmy, Janis, Joni, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young's, whose songs we did repeat, and we memorized their every line like they were jewels before our feet. Well, Santana, he took us driving. Joan Baez, she kept it real. She reminded us, her protest songs were the reason we were there. Our revolution, we hadn't done. Well, there we were, Michael, standing on the stage of tomorrow with a vast sea of young hope, looking for the light and the promise that a difference we could provoke. in the blink of an eye, character lines abound on those cherished faces that once partied from dusk till dawn. But now, these young spirits have moved on, but the mold has not been broken. And the spirit of Woodstock is embedded in our brain. And all those freaky flashbacks from acid that we were promised, they never came. The one thing I can tell you was like a flashing color wheels, spinning rainbows out of control. Our senses tingling and alive in a touchy-feely vibe. We were all as one, free, naked, running in love through the wind, through the woods. It was all about freedom. It was all about love. It was all about getting together. I felt so relieved. I can't express the exact feeling. One thing I can do, I can tell you above all, I can't express this exact feeling because it was like a surging waterfall. But one thing I can tell you above all, you should be.
Did you talk about rehearsing with Jimmy at the house and then playing the Star Spangled Banner?
Yeah. So when I said Gypsy Center Rainbow, she said, I'm going to call her Band of Gypsies. This is how nice this guy is. I'm going to call her Band of Gypsies. Band of Gypsies, Gypsy Center Rainbows has more pizzazz, it has more zoom these days. He said, okay, we'll think about it. And then he started doing the Star Spangled Banner. So I'm thinking of doing this. I said, hey, we're the counterculture. Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to do this? I think we should do this for our country. I said, well, all right. Of course, I was wrong and he was right because that's the most iconic moment of the entire festival, so to speak. I mean, agree with me.
Totally.
But, people remember Jimmy's Star Spangled Banner as a pivotal moment in the event. So I said to him, why do that? He said, no, I'm not going to do it. So when he introduced the band, this is how beautiful it was. When he introduced the band, he said, hey, we're Gypsy Center Rainbows. Just a band of gypsies. And he looked at me and he went, just a band of gypsies. And we never did Gypsy Center Rainbows because that was our fusion band that went away. And Jimmy was contracted to do a lot of shows with the trio. That's how he made the money. So he made a deal with Michael Jeffries, who was his manager. He said, okay, I will do those shows, but I want to do with Billy Cox, who was the bass player who worked with us, and Buddy Miles, who was an incredible drummer. Reason being, Mitch Mitchell was a jazz drummer. He was very busy. And we were trying to do things that locked in. Buddy Miles was much more of a power player. As opposed to Mitch, which was beautiful when it was that trio, but when we were trying to expand into other musical realms, we needed more of this kind of interlocking between 6 or 7 people on stage. And that's why Jimmy augmented the band. He says, I want to do some different stuff, G. I'm bringing my friends up that I was in the Army with, Billy Cox, Larry Lee, they were just in Vietnam, they're going to come up. Now, Jimmy and I were there a long time, partying, doing stuff, going back and forth to New York and so on. They came up about, I think maybe a month or two before the concert. Mitch came up like 3 weeks before the concert. He was pissed off. He was like, what are you doing with all these boys? He goes, okay, these guys can't pay. What are we doing? Like, just please follow me. And he was very angry. And the last time I saw Mitch, which was like just 2 weeks before he passed away, he kept on jabbing me with that. He said, yeah. Because I said, hey, I wish I could. Why don't you? Because Woodstock was my first professional gig.
Yeah.
It was my birthday, August 15th. It was my birthday. It started on August 15th. It was very monumental.
No. Can we listen to a little of Jimmy? Okay, what am I doing?
You are so funny. Oh, there's my.
Oh, that's the best.
Yeah, well, it's not mine.
He looked like
What can I not? Oh, and that is
That's my dress. Wait.
Rona's dress.
My,
I'm not even a Leo like you. I'm a Capricorn. Yeah, Leo.
this dress has been in the Grammy Museum, and I think in the Rock Hall. It was my 68, 69 dress. Okay, so this was from a very a high-end hippie store, which didn't mean it cost very much, in LA called Rubicon. I actually so I wore this, and Bob Santelli, who ran the Grammy Museum, said to me, "Well, that's quite a shirt." And I said, Bob, it was a dress then. It shrunk, I believe. But it still fits, so that's it. That's what we were wearing then. Well, it wasn't, yeah, I'm still 5'3". So there were stores. This Rubicon opened in '68, and they were doing handmade things. I lost my Sgt. Pepper coat along the way, though, but, you know, it was the real deal, all hand done. And it was quite great, so, yeah, so that was fun. Anyway, your vest. Right, so go ahead.
Okay. So when he played it, did you figure he was right? When you heard it being played?
No.
That it was the...
I still felt like, okay, you do it, it's your band.
Oh, that's so funny. That's so funny.
But later on, history proved me wrong. It proved me right, and I'm fine with that. You know, I really am. You make mistakes, just perfect. I'm close, but I'm not perfect.
You know what? So Jimmy was in the military, which is kind of a crazy thing to think of. And Rona did a million interviews with people who were at Woodstock and involved with Woodstock for this amazing book, Genesis Woodstock 40, this multimedia box set, very expensive book.
Michael and I.
But Tim O'Brien, who wrote Going After Cacciato and several other books, wonderful writer, he served in Vietnam. You did the most exquisite interview with him and talking about how in Vietnam, how they were hearing about it.
So Tim O'Brien, he teaches at McAllister now, I
He
think.
went to McAllister.
Yeah, and he came from, I didn't know people like this growing up. His whole family were military families. And we wanted to get, for the book that Michael and I were involved with, people who had other points of view. And he told me this story that was so shocking to me because I never knew anybody. No Jewish kid I ever knew went to Vietnam. And he had enlisted, and he was there. And he got letters from people on the mainland, here, saying there was this big anti-war festival. And how meaningful it was for the guys who were serving in Vietnam, and that rock and roll was what saved them, and that they would come through the rice paddies at night listening to Hey Jude. And at this point, I'm a pretty calm.
Singing.
Right,
You would be singing.
and I'm pretty calm. Most of the time, I'm sobbing because Hey Jude is doing that to me, and I'm not over there having to kill people. And he talked about the meaning of music and the meaning of knowing that there was support in the U.S. for them, because he was the same age as we were. It was just the most astonishing.
It was also interesting because you said, well, did you read magazines and newspapers? He said, well, the only thing we could see was Stars and Stripes, but it was letters.
Right.
So the letters would come, and somebody's sister either was there or they were seeing it on. So they were really hearing it in this wonderfully kind of old-fashioned oral tradition almost. But